Welcome back, everybody. We are going to be prompt with our times today so that we can honor your Friday. So next up, I have the absolute pleasure of introducing Erin Amy. Erin Amy is a literacy consultant for Northwest Tri-County Intermediate Unit in Pennsylvania, where she provides professional development in MTSS and structured literacy implementation. She supported 5 school sites during Pennsylvania's dyslexia pilot, offering technical assistance and training in evidence-based reading instruction. Erin holds a master's degree in special education and is a LETRS professional learning facilitator, a Cadence reading mentor, and an ECRI trainer. She is a co-founder of the board of the Reading League Pennsylvania. Her background includes teaching special education and undergraduate education courses. Erin is dedicated to helping educators build the knowledge and confidence needed to ensure all students, including those with dyslexia, thrive as readers. Get ready, intermediate and secondary educators. This session moves beyond basic phonics instruction to provide a high-efficiency toolkit focused on morphemic analysis and flexible decoding routines for multisyllabic words. I am delighted to introduce you to Erin Amy.
Thank you, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here today and so honored to be part of your day today. I didn't find out until Friday that I was part of the general session, so here we are. So today's session is breaking the big word barrier, and I will go back one slide to give you the code, and then I'm sure they're going to share that in the chat with you. I love following Dr. Pam Kastner. We're friends and Pennsylvania colleagues, and our 2 states, Michigan and Pennsylvania, I feel like are very closely aligned in the practices of MTSS and structured literacy with our legislation and our practices. And so we are both very thrilled to be part of your day today. So we both are very ambitious always with our presentations and love to keep you engaged. And so I'm hoping that you'll see some carryover and that you'll be able to do some retrieval practice. So this is really focused on adolescent readers. But even if you're teaching elementary grades, I want you to keep in mind some of these big ideas as your students move through the grades, and even your precocious learners. It may be relevant for those students that you're working with in 1st grade that can read some multisyllabic words. So we want to push those students forward. So thank you for the introduction, Kate. I really appreciate that. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about myself and my family quickly. I live in Erie, Pennsylvania, and I've been seeing all of the Upper Peninsula weather things. So I'm hoping that all our friends up there are doing okay after the snow bomb, and you're able to attend today. I was invited to join LETRS at the state level when my oldest son, who's there, who looks like he's 18, is only 15, and joined Carol Tolman and Nancy Hennessy and Pam Kastner and the team at Patton and across the state to be LETRS trained. And that really did change the outcome of my career and what I thought about reading instruction. So my career and my passion are sort of collided. They're one and the same. I have been driven to ensure that all students, no matter their zip code or the school that they attend, that they get effective instruction in that setting. They don't need to go out and look for tutoring or have other support. I've seen firsthand the debilitating ripple effects of a reading difficulty, dyslexia, both academically, socially, and thirdly, emotionally. And so if we work with those students, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I chose this topic, breaking down the word barrier, for a couple of reasons. First, we've spent over a decade intensely focused on K2 foundational skills instruction with best intentions, right, on preventing reading failure with MTSS, core instruction, getting those foundational skills in place. But in the meantime, we've put intermediate and secondary literacy a little bit on the back burner. Now there are some new guiding principles to guide us in this practice. And so we want to put those into our classrooms. But often, those of you sitting in the room are teaching secondary and maybe middle school, even upper elementary, are often not taught how to teach kids to read big words and teach morphology explicitly. Sometimes Students coming from K2 into 3rd grade and 4th grade know more about syllable types and syllable division and morphology than their teachers do. And that's not a fault of anyone sitting in this room. It's a systems thing, right? So middle school, high school ELA teachers, English teachers, I'm so glad that you're here because your students want to learn your content and we want to give them access to it. So students with dyslexia often have a more difficult time kicking over into that self-teaching mode. And so they need more explicit instruction. And I was looking at the dyslexia handbook that your state has created. There are a lot of references to what we can do in core instruction, not only in the elementary grades, but in the 2nd grade. So I'm hoping that you do have a copy of that. And as Dr. Kim St. Martin talked about earlier this morning, I hope you've tabbed it and you're highlighting it and talking through it with your teams. The second reason I chose this topic is that I think it's imperative that all students have the opportunity to access complex text, grade level, challenging text that teaches them about the world. And so that's going to be my second half of the presentation is how do we build an on-ramp into complex text? All right, so let's get going. Let's start here with, there we go. There we go. It's just delayed a little bit. So we're going to focus on our students. And our students are really our focus for today, our why. So I'd like you to think about what students you have sitting in your classrooms on Monday and through this year that have had difficulty. Our why is our students. I want you to read through this quote with me, and Dr. Pam Kastner set us up perfectly for some close exercises. So we want to keep you engaged. Do the choral reading, the close reading. Anytime that you see a bolded or underlined or highlighted word, I'd like you to read that. Poor developed word recognition skills are the most pervasive and debilitating sources of reading challenges for students with learning disabilities. So this comes from Jessica Tost and her team, and I'll be sharing some of her resources, but she does a lot of work around secondary reading difficulties. And so I'd like to think about our students and thinking about what we want to do as we move through this session. So just a quick community of practice. I know that Michigan is also involved in PBIS. So we're thinking about what are we doing to stay respectful and responsible. Hopefully you're all safe and cozy and you have something great to drink and maybe some snacks. So building that learning community, I'd like you to be able to easily interact. Be mindful of those of you who are around each other. And when I have you do a stop and jot, come back together when I call you back. I'll do a countdown from 3, 2, 1. Ask questions in the Q&A, and I'm hoping that we get there to those parts. And we're looking for partner talking and also a handout. So I have created a handout for you. I hope that those are attached and that you've been able to print those out, or you can access those at a later time. All right, so that's how we'll interact together. So in preparing this session, I leaned into some resources on this slide. It is a collection of research articles, guides, webinars, things that are meant to help teachers translate research into practice into your classrooms. The IES practice guides, which I hope you all know about, the Institute of Educational Sciences. You can see those on my slide. You can see that the providing reading interventions for grades 4 through 9. Shout out to Dr. Kim St. Martin, who does an opening webinar and was a co-author on that. It's a fantastic resource that we've been training our secondary folks with. And an older resource that is improving adolescent literacy. So you have prepaid, right, through our federal tax dollars, resources to help you address specific classroom challenges. Each of those guides has strategies, implementation steps, and evidence levels of what we know works. And so we want to start there. We want to be sure that we're doing what's aligned to what we know, at least for now. And we want to also take a look at some of those strategies that are broken down in things like Dr. Devin Kearns' work, Helping Students with Dyslexia Read Long Words. It's a great article. It's free and open source, so you can definitely get that. I would highly suggest that you download that and read that article in full. And as I mentioned, Jessica Toss's team at the University of Texas at Austin also has several papers on multiple syllabic word reading and has designed an intervention called Word Connections, which I'll show you at the end. So I've provided a citation slide at the end of the presentation that you can find all of these resources. So our learning intentions today, with always keeping that accessing complex grade level text in mind, right? We don't want to isolate, just like Pam said, don't isolate, integrate, right? We want to integrate those components into our core instruction, the content areas that we're teaching, not for practice sake, right? So we want to be sure that students can then translate that and transfer that into grade level complex texts. So our first learning intention that participants will describe the vital connection between efficient multisyllabic decoding and academic success. I'd also like you to utilize multisyllabic decoding routines that will help your students break down those big academic terms. The third piece is to create a mental orthographic representation for students of those words that students with dyslexia really need to create in order to recognize big words. And then number 4, some guidance on planning instruction that has guided practice and text sets to build an on-ramp into complex text. So here's our table of contents, our outline for the session today. We're going to first start about the shift in complexity of text as we move from elementary to intermediate and secondary settings. We'll take a look at lexical quality and what makes words sticky. So Pam gave you a little bit of a preview on that, which is great. So we'll have a little reiteration and that will make it permanent, right, in our brains. And then we'll talk a little bit through decoding routines. Now we could spend multiple days practicing these routines and really getting good at it. So this is really just a sampler to hopefully whet your appetite to have you dig in a little bit deeper and learn more. Hopefully as you go through letters, Unit 4 is all about this decoding routines and morphological analysis. So we want you to manage those morphemes, leverage those morphemes to learn big words and decode them. And then very quickly, like Pam had said, there's definitely a lot to encoding, but I'll give you one quick strategy that you can use for the SOS in multisyllabic words. So we'll talk about bridging to complex text sort of as our final piece together. So let's start with the shift. We're thinking about texts, right? We're moving from decodable texts to reading more grade level texts that have less controlled text, right? And that text becomes increasingly difficult. And so we need to keep moving our students' skills. It's always a moving target, and we want to have them develop those skills. So what are the complexities of stretched texts? I firmly believe that all students have the right to access grade level complex texts. So at this point, I want you to stop and jot what makes text complex. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to do that. Okay, so I know that our chat is a little bit behind, but if you'd like to share something in the chat, and Kate can bring that forward if she'd like to, but I'm just going to share with you some of the factors that I hope are on your list. And if they are, you can give yourself a little star there, and then jot down the rest that maybe you don't have. So the quantitative measures that we have, those are the things that computers, AI can really count up for us and determine the level of complexity of the text for us. Those measures are, what are the number of multisyllabic words in the text? How rare are the words that you have in that text? Are they known or unknown vocabulary? You also want to look at sentence length, right? We're looking at syntactic density, complex structures of sentences. That definitely makes text more complex. I wish we had time to talk about syntax today, but we really don't. So thinking about the number of ideas in a sentence, that's another piece called proposition density. And then text cohesion. How well does it flow together? Is it hard to follow what the author is saying, or is it easily interpreted? So those are quantitative features that computers can calculate for us. We also have qualitative features, and those qualitative features are things like text structure. Narrative structure is often easier for students to comprehend. Looking at language demands, right? Those vocabulary pieces, colloquialisms, sayings, maybe there is some scripted pieces in there and quotes, and also the author's purpose, the underlying meaning, the theme. Those are all qualitative pieces that are more difficult for a computer to interpret. So as noted in the Michigan Dyslexia Handbook, students with dyslexia often have that difficulty with language, right? Literacy is language. I hope you said that. And language is literacy. So particularly manipulating sounds in language, mapping spoken print sounds to print, and then instantly recognizing printed words. All of those are language skills that are required to access complex text. So this is just some skills over time, sort of a rudimentary version, and looking at what does it take, right? In K1, we're really focused to looking at basic phonics patterns, right? Teaching kids the code, phonemic awareness, alphabetic principle, monosyllabic word reading. And then as we move through, we look at, we're starting to get some more advanced skills like doubling the final consonant, adding vowel suffixes, that's maybe first grade, working on more rare spelling patterns, and introducing kids to polysyllabic words, right? So usually that happens at the end of first grade, starting in second grade, and then third grade, we're reading to learn, right? Well, we still have some learning to read work to do, right? So we need to really focus on thinking about reading multisyllabic words as a foundational skill. Every student needs to be able to have a strategy, know the content, and be able to apply that into their text to read long words. As we moved into fourth and sixth grade, we get into really complex texts. We're doing things like analyzing the text and looking at multiple patterns. I just lost my slides here. There we go. So we're looking at those rare vocabulary, complex syntax. And as we move into middle and high school, we have to read, think, and write like an expert in our field. That's really focused on disciplinary literacy. But if you're like many of the groups that I work with, we still have students sitting in sixth grade, seventh grade, eighth grade who can't tackle multisyllabic words. And so it is very detrimental to the content that they're learning and the ability of their writing skills to show what they know about that content. So we want to think about that general high utility toolkit of reading strategies, summarizing, predicting, all really focus in on, do they have that word reading and knowledge and spelling ability to then tackle those higher complex skills? So that IES practice guide is looking at building world and word knowledge. Go ahead and say that with me. World and word knowledge. That means building vocabulary, right? Not just flashcards, not putting them in a notebook, looking them up in the dictionary, but really digging into what do these words mean. Pam talked about the morphology and morphological relatives of words. So important when we're thinking about word study to decode and then also make meaning of those words. The IES practice guide also guides us to fluency practices that are effective and looking at challenging text. So I'm going to try to integrate those things today as we talk about meeting those needs and breaking down barriers for students in complex text. Okay, so let's get started. So this is a famous photograph. I'd like you to jot in your notes what you know about this. So we are activating our schema. What do you know about this image? What is it conveying? What could you infer about the image, the time period, the setting? Maybe you know the name of the photographer or the photograph. Let's elicit some world knowledge here and pull out those stores of knowledge that you've built. Go ahead, I'll give you about 20 seconds. Jot things down. Okay, I'm seeing some things come in the chat. Thank you so much, Kate. Great. So this is a visual text, right? We can use photographs to elicit knowledge, build empathy, right? Reaction, connection with students. So I'm hoping that you're using some visual texts. Oh, okay. We have Depression era. Yes. And the Dust Bowl. Wow. Give yourself a pat on the back if you know that. I'm not seeing the title yet, but I'm sure that some of you have that written down. I know that you are in some watch parties. The American West. Ooh, worry. Yes. War, potentially. And so let's take a look. Where did those stores of knowledge in your schema come from? Right? So if you know something about the Great Depression, you might have picked up on the raggedness of their appearances. Right? You may have read things about the Great Depression or the American West. So this is a photograph called Migrant Mother, and it is a famous photograph that depicts Florence Owens Thompson, whose name wasn't even recognized until 1978. And this photograph was taken during the Dust Bowl in the crash of 1929. So if you know about that era, you know that it was a great economic hardship, right, in the United States. And so we can look at component pieces, and not Ansel Adams. Good guess with the black and white image, but this is Dorothea Lange's most well-known photograph. And so this is an excerpt taken from a ReadWorks article, and it says commonly referred to as Migrant Mother. It was taken in 1936 during the Great Depression. The photograph depicts a widowed woman from Oklahoma who was living with her 7 children while working as a migrant laborer in the pea fields of Nipomo, California, near Santa Barbara. So let's look at this text. What makes this text complex? Well, we have some multisyllabic words. I'm hoping you're pointing them out with me. Photograph, depicts, widowed, migrant, laborer. Those words are complex because they're multisyllabic. They're big words, right? They're rare as well. When was the last time that you used the word depict in your conversation? They're also abstract, right? It's hard to just show a picture of migrant, right, without getting into a deep discussion and making connections with other things. The words themselves are the primary obstacle of complex texts for struggling readers. So let's take a look at what we need to do, think about. Students with reading difficulties, in your handout, you have a little space to jot down. Proper names, yes, those are definitely some challenges. Kids sort of skip over them, right? So thinking about your students that have reading difficulties, your students that you work with have dyslexia, when it comes to adolescents, even upper elementary, when they have reading difficulties, what are those common word reading behaviors that you see when they attempt to read some complex text, like stretch text? Go ahead and jot those down. What are some things that you see? Okay, so just like before, if you've written these things down, give yourself a little star and then add anything that maybe you didn't think of. And if you have something that I don't have, please share that in the chat as well. Okay, so the first ones are coming in. Guessing from the first few words. Yes, Huge component, right? We want to make sure that we teach students in the very early grades to look through the entire word, use their letter sound correspondences, but it's just easier to fill it in, right? Than it is to look at the syllables and look at the prefixes and suffixes and then try to figure it out. It's labored decoding or word calling. Yes. All right. So if they didn't skip it, it's labored, right? So they might skip words. They might just guess or substitute words that look similar. Some of you might have said they get stuck, right? And they give up. Or they're completely turned off and won't even attempt to try it, right? So we don't want that. So behavior and academics and social emotional learning, they're all in the same triangle. They're all interconnected. And if we're looking at academics, right, how do we then increase motivation and make sure that students feel confident and competent that they're able to read what we're asking them to read at their grade level? So when we're looking at Professor Compton from AIM was talking about the alphabetic principle, and as reading develops, it develops through word-specific orthography, right? And so students that have dyslexia have a reduced generalization to other words or non-words. So if you know the word stone that was in the spelling test, right, they don't automatically generate that or transfer that or generalize that to an unknown word with that same pattern. So they have an increased reliance on memorization, which taxes, right, your orthographic memory and your fluency, due usually to a sub-lexical structure difficulty with phonological difficulty. So sometimes you see students who are talking, which we didn't put in the slide here, they miss syllables in multisyllabic words when they're speaking. They might confuse or merge two words together, right? Because they have that weak understanding of the language system. So this is what it feels like to read with word level difficulties. So we read the first paragraph, and now what I would like you to do is read the second paragraph to yourself. And I want you to think about, what does the second paragraph say and what is it about? Okay, if that was a little bit frustrating for you, that was supposed to be it. So normally I would say, shout out what accuracy level you think that is. Just the second paragraph. So just looking at the second paragraph, it has about 53 words. There are 10 errors in that. This is 80% accuracy. And as a special education teacher, going way back the early thousands, the aughts, we used to write IEP goals that had 80% accuracy. So if I were able to go back to myself and say, self, that is not good enough, right? Because 10 errors makes this completely incomprehensible. What about 5 errors? Hey, that's looking better, right? Only 5 errors. This is 6 errors. But 5 errors is 90% accuracy, right? That seems pretty good. That's like an A. But what meaning is lost here? What are the consequences of not being able to read at the time the photograph was taken? The family was living in extreme poverty, right? Surviving on frozen peas gathered from the fields and birds caught, right? Through its powerful portrayal, talking about the image, right? The photograph, hardship, resilience, right? Comprehension, skill rests on word reading skill. So why don't you say that with me? This is from Dr. Perfetti, who is also from Pennsylvania, University of Pittsburgh, where I graduated from. So Dr. Perfetti said, comprehension skill rests on word reading skill. Okay? You cannot comprehend if you cannot read the words. So here are the words from the 2 paragraphs of the migrant mother article that was written at the 6th grade level in that ReadWorks article. What makes these words complex? I think we all know, right? They're multisyllabic, right? They're rare. When was the last time that you said the word portray in a conversation? But what is the value of knowing those words? If you can't decode the words, you can't connect to their meaning, which makes comprehension of that text and the greater context out of reach. So when we're thinking about words, right, breaking down that big word barrier, we're also thinking at the same time about vocabulary. So Perfetti also talks about vocabulary as the linchpin of reading comprehension, the central connection point between the word identification system and the comprehension system. So word structure matters. And so we're really going to talk about how do we get at that, right? How do we break down those word level barriers? So I've created I can statements for you for each of the sections of our table of contents. I'm going to skip the following I can statements, but these can be used as reflection when you go back to the content and just take a look at those. So if you have those slides downloaded, I've made slight modifications, but pretty much they're all stable and you should have those I can statements. So I'm hoping that by the end of this presentation and through your further learning in letters and through the Dyslexia Handbook and all of the initiatives that Michigan has going on, that you will get to the point where you can explain why multisyllabic words are critical in that gateway to comprehension, especially in grades 4 through 12. We also want you to be able to identify a strategy today to be able to break down big words that are found in that grade level content. So quickly, we're going to talk about Perfetti's lexical quality hypothesis. And if you have completed letters, this will be a refresher to bring it back to your working memory. And so we're going to really talk about reading doesn't exist as a skill on its own, right? And so Dr. Kastner already talked about orthographic mapping, so I'll go through this really quickly and you can just review. But that golden triangle, Perfetti's golden triangle, talks about mapping, making words sticky in your long-term memory. And you must have these things, right? If you're reading words, right, your brain is storing them. And look at your Dyslexia Handbook in that component about the reading brain and in letters. It's really fascinating and really important to know that we are not born to read. We have to teach this. If you're an ELA teacher, an English teacher, you probably learn to read really easily, and that's very, very difficult to understand why students have such difficulty. So the reading brain helps us to connect to our students that have that difficulty. So we have long-term storage, right? We want to get things into long-term storage in our brain so that we have instant retrieval when we're looking at text and we're writing down what we want to say. And so in order to do that, we have to have those three-legged stool, right? I like to think about this as the golden triangle. You can do a little hand motion like this. The P in your notes is also there for you to take some skeletal notes. And I don't think I mentioned, but skeletal notes is one of a strategy that you can utilize in secondary to help students focus on the content, what's important, without bogging them down with all those transcription skills. So I'm hoping everyone knows about skeletal notes. And so what we need to do is we need to see the spelling, the orthography. That's the O in possum, right? And then we need to be able to pronounce those words. The pronunciation is then what links it to the meaning, right? If I've never heard the word flavonoid, right, I won't know if I've decoded that correctly because it's not in my lexicon, right? And so the retrieval piece is essential to have those three components. So if you're teaching vocabulary in your content in science and social studies, whatever you're teaching, make sure that you have students pronounce the words and practice those pronunciations so that we can bond it to the spelling, right? When they identify that word in text, they need to be able to pronounce the word and then connect to its meaning. When those three things are bonded together, that word has a reliable, coherent, high quality mental orthographic representation. Woo, say that with me. Mental orthographic representation. And so we're looking at those word identification parts, and this is the golden triangle. So we must start by mapping those phonemes and graphemes together to store them, and then utilize those. Typically, developing readers can see a word 1 to 4 times, and it is in their memory instantly, forever, right? This is what Stanislas Dehaene calls the letterbox. It's there to just pull out and retrieve in milliseconds. But in order to do that, we have to have those three components of the golden triangle bonded together. So our students with dyslexia, sometimes it requires 20 times that amount of practice. So if it takes a typical reader one time to see the word and it's mapped forever, it might take our students 20 times or 80 times. And so how do we bridge that gap with practice? One of the ways that we make things sticky is by attending to multidimensionality. And you'll see more of this in letters if you take letters. But this really comes from, this sort of depiction comes from Nancy Hennessy's book, The Reading Comprehension Blueprint, which is not a beach read, but a fantastic deep dive in how to teach comprehension aligned to the science. I would highly recommend that you seek out that resource. So I would guess that most of you look at this word in the middle, the target, G-R-E-E-N, and instantly know its pronunciation. You know that EE stands for a certain sound, right? And you're able to rattle off some meanings, right? So we want kids to have breadth, right? Lots of words that you know, and depth. And that preciseness of function trumps the form. So we're going to think about the challenge, right? When we're using vocabulary as part of our comprehension or connected text, we need to be teaching those relatives, and we need to be teaching some words deeply, right? That are really important and critical to academic language and our content. So when we're looking at Louisa Mote's work in speech to print, we have some questions to ask, right? We want to ask, what does that word mean? Okay, so if you have seen the word green, your memory has pronounced it for you in your brain without you even knowing it. And you can't help but read the word if you know it, right? It's in your lexicon. It's stored in your letterbox. What do you know about this word? Okay, so I'm going to have you jot down some meaning. So what do you know about this word? Well, you might think about its morphology. You might think about its semantic category, right? That means what group does it belong to? Types of words. You might think about our syntactic category. How does it function in a sentence? That would be parts of speech and grammar, right? And then we also think about connotations. How is it used? Does it have a negative connotation? Does it mean something sort of under the radar that our students wouldn't see? And Kate just said, hey, there are some figurative uses for the word green. Yes. All right. I see those coming in. So go ahead and type in what you know about the word, and we'll play off that. So morphology is all about what parts have meaning, right? So in this word, this is a free morpheme. It can hang out all by itself in text and in language, right? So we have a free morpheme. It is, it's a little delay there. It functions usually as a noun, sometimes as an adjective. Green means go. All right. Oh, we're thinking about vegetables now. If you're talking about green, it might have that negative connotation like, oh, you look pretty green. Are you okay? Maybe you're sick. Or green with envy, right? Oh, it could be a political party. Wow. Okay. Kudos to you. So if we're going with sick and the color and it's a noun, it's a free morpheme, we could use that, right? Her face turned a sickly shade of green. And somebody nailed this already, right? We might say the greens were wilted. So whoever said vegetables, there you go. There's an alternate meaning. This word is poly, right? It has many meanings. It's polysemous. So we have poly and semantics squished together, meaning polysemous. Okay, so the greens are wilted, right? Would give us a different collection of meaning, right? And then what if we said, John is green? Take it easy on him. Ah, and someone did put in the chat, they're new at something. Yeah, they're a noob. So if you're using your middle school slang, John is a noob. Yes. Okay, so we could be environmentally friendly. We could have a green thumb. Wow, if you are working with English language learners, this is a lot to take in. This basic everyday word that people would assume kids know about color has lots of information packed in, right? So it's not just knowing the word, it's knowing all the things, right? The bundles of knowledge that surround that word. So if you were, someone had just shared, if you were saying, I'll meet you on the green at noon, right? What does that mean? I'll meet you on the golf course, on the practice putting green, right? There's a lot of connotation, and it depends on our categories and how we're using those in sentences, right? So we're going to wrap this section up by saying hearing, seeing, and saying the words strengthen neural connections, builds phonological and orthographic representations, and reinforces word meanings. And that is multi-dimensionality of language, which experience facilitates both receptive and expressive vocabulary knowledge. So we want to be sure that we're making things sticky, right? We're talking about the pronunciation, the spelling, the orthography, and then also all those elements of meaning around the words. So how do we tackle those big words? Again, the Devin Kearns article and the interventions for grades 4 through 9 will give you in-depth scenarios and some additional practice opportunities, but we wanted to walk through a few of these together. So reading big words is a foundational skill. All right, so we're going to tackle it. So I'd like you to make a prediction here. What percentage of new words in 5th grade texts are polysyllabic, multisyllabic? Okay, so just make a little prediction. This is really fun when we can just kind of shout it out. But for the sake of time, I'm just going to click through. 90% of new words that students encounter in 5th grade texts are polysyllabic. That's a lot of new words that we get in 5th grade. So here is our friend again, Dr. Perfetti. Let's read this chorally. I was just struck by the fact that kids who had trouble understanding what they read, if you looked at them closely, they had trouble reading words. Most often when teachers report that students can't comprehend the text, I know from the research that they're most likely having difficulty reading the words. And even if they can read them accurately, they might not be reading them quickly and efficiently enough to free up that working memory. So efficiency of word reading has an impact on the resources, right? Our cognitive resources that are necessary for those higher level things like thinking about a theme, right? Or analyzing the text. And so that added timed element of reading tasks is critical to whether word reading is proficient and easy enough. So I just had to give a shout out to your wonderful Michigan team for this fantastic learning progressions figure that is in your dyslexia handbook. I hope that you really take a look at this if you're teaching secondary and look at this expansion on what does it take to teach students these language elements, right? Sort of a riff on the Scarborough's reading rope, which is a theory-supported heuristic or mental shortcut. What I really want you to look at is this typical reading development and those component skills that must be taught so that we can move students from novice readers, right, to skilled, fluent readers. That only happens with effective instruction, practice, right, to build automaticity. Automaticity doesn't just happen, it has to be built. And so we're constructing meaning as we're building fluency. And this strand of basic phonics to multisyllabic decoding is right here on your reading learning progression. We have to ongoingly teach kids the skills to refine those skills and transfer them to new contexts. So if you're teaching English, if you're teaching science, what I ask my teachers is, how well do your students read your text? Because oftentimes they don't really know how well students read because they're not in the habit of sitting down and listening to individual students read, particularly the students that don't volunteer to read in class. So lean in, just listen to them whisper read a section of the passage and see how they're doing. Are they fluent? Are they pausing? Are they getting those multisyllabic words correct? And if not, we may need to be building in some additional practices and scaffolds for our students, even at core instruction. Well, fluency doesn't really matter that much. That's what I hear from teachers. They can read the words. They can read. They just can't comprehend. And so I'm going to attempt to prove that that is just not the case from what we know from research. So why is automaticity and thereby text reading fluency so important? I want you to jot down the number of words correct per minute that a typical sixth grader, right? This is our goal. Where should typical sixth graders and all sixth graders with really effective supports, right? Tiers 2 and tier 3, in addition to core, should reach? How many words correct in 1 minute should a student be able to read? So this is the 50th percentile right there in the middle, not like the highest level, just typical, right? 50th percentile. So if you said something like 140 words correct per minute, you're right in the ballpark. Okay, this is from an oral reading fluency chart from Hasbrook and Tyndall. This was the 2017 version, and we're looking at the 50th percentile. So if you're asking students to read 20 minutes, right, maybe in class, together, partner reading, or maybe it's an outside assignment, or if they're reading for fun, oh my goodness, they would be reading, right? Let's take a look. 2,920 words in 20 minutes. You know what a typical amount of time spent, which is also in your dyslexia handbook, of students reading in class is in secondary? 4 minutes a day they spend reading. Guys, that's not enough practice, right? We have to be sure that kids are doing the hard work and they're doing the reading, right? They're exercising those muscles and those skills. So if you're not reading at the 50th percentile, but you're reading above the 50th percentile, you can read over 200 words correct per minute. And so if you spend that same amount of time, 20 minutes reading your text, right? You'll be at that 90th percentile. You've read 4,080 words, right? That's a big difference between the 50th and the 90th percentile. But what if you're working with students that are reading at the 10th percentile, right? Those students are spending the same amount of time reading 91 words correct per minute and have only gotten through 1,820 words, which seems like a lot, but when we compare it to the 90th percentile, those students sitting in the same class taking history, look at the difference between the number of words that they have experienced, right? So if you're a fluent reader, you have a huge advantage for storing new words in your lexicon. So practice is critical, but we also know that we need to spend more time doing the work, practicing, right? So that students have access to those words in text. So this is a quote from an adult student who was being tutored in an Orton-Gillingham type intervention, and it was quoted saying, "Knowing basic phonics isn't enough. An efficient, structured, logical, scientific, reliably automatic system for dividing and pronouncing longer words was essential prerequisite for my academic literacy." So this is an adult, right? And we can make sure that students don't leave our high schools not able to read, seeking out adult literacy help, right? We can do this. So your handbook says, since dyslexia is a word level reading disorder, primarily characterized by word level reading difficulties, explicit instruction in phonological skills and word level reading skills, decoding and spelling is needed. And so what does that look like? Well, first, let's just acknowledge all the things that you're thinking right now, right? Here are the roadblocks. This is easier said than done. So teachers commonly report, right? Like, hey, we weren't trained how to do this. We don't teach kids how to read in secondary. We know our content, right? We have to teach our content. We're tested on our content. This is what I got hired to teach, science, not teaching multisyllabic words, right? When do we have time for this? And we also get reports of, my students are just checked out. They're not interested in reading, right? And so we know that content area teachers are often frustrated, right, by the lack of skills their students come to the classroom with, because it's hard for them to access their content area materials. And so we know that it's important for content area teachers to understand where reading breakdowns occur so that we can enforce, work as a team, and be collaboratively helping students access that context. And using those textbooks, right? Read the textbooks, reading those components, right? Not just listening to the audio, not just having a conversation, but getting in, digging in, and reading those words that are academically challenging. Because if we don't dig in there and we don't exercise those skills, it will never become more accomplished. So these skill gaps, right, on the teacher's part and the student's part are a huge barrier to overcoming these big words in complex texts. So how do we build those things? Well, there are some strategies that we can use. Okay, so the strategies that we can use to improve polysyllabic word reading are either based in syllables, right? Knowing that syllables always have a vowel letter, right? And that spoken syllables, if I were to break a syllable apart, is different than when I look at a word and then break it apart for pronunciation. So syllables can only be divided so that they look like they could be published in text, right? They can look like they have a word at the beginning or an end, right? So we'll take a look at that. So we're going to move from syllable-based decoding strategies, those novice strategies, to more independence. So the ESHALOV strategy is an acronym for every syllable has at least one vowel. Say that with me. Every syllable has at least one vowel. Okay, so if your students don't know too much about morphology, right? If you haven't taught those prefixes like you saw in Dr. Pizzo's classroom, that morphology wall, you would start with syllable-based, right? Just looking at the letters, finding the vowels, and breaking those apart and pronouncing those. As they become more skilled in language and understanding morphology, you would move to a morpheme-based strategy, something where you're looking for the affixes, right? To find the base or the root. We want to teach those affixes though, right? We're not expecting them to know them. We're teaching them in a scope and sequence. We're practicing, and then we're asking students to recognize those parts in long words. So the second collection of strategies is really based in that higher order thinking skill of morphology, right? How do we make meaning of words, and how do we recognize those parts to reduce the cognitive load that syllables, right, don't necessarily have meaning, but morphemes do. So eventually we want students to use this word analysis information covertly. While they're looking at a word, they know exactly what to do because they've practiced that instructional routine so that they can do it independently. Okay, so morpheme-based strategies, BEST and peel-off. Peel-off strategy is what I'm going to focus on mostly. And then those overt and covert strategies are moving toward independence. And you'll see these strategies throughout all of those interventions that are focused on multisyllabic words. So just kind of quickly here, let's talk about meta-knowledge, as Dr. Devin Kearns talked about. What do you have to kind of know in order to be able to facilitate this? And so I'm going to just be your rock star, your cheerleader, and say, it's okay. Do it in front of the kids, learn with them, and they might be able to teach you some of the things that they've learned along the way as well. But if we're open and vulnerable, they'll be more open and vulnerable and feel safe in your space. So if the concepts of open and closed syllables aren't something that you know, vowel pronunciations are dependent on orthography. Okay, so how the letters are put together in strings is crucial for pronunciation. So you really need to know how vowels behave in syllable constructs so that we can pronounce them correctly. All right, so Kearns' research has shown, right, that if you have an open syllable, well, I'll get to the research in a second, but an open syllable is a single vowel at the end of the syllable, like in the word so, right? So you have a single vowel letter, O, there's nothing after it, no consonants after it, and no other vowel after it. So the vowel is long, okay? Pronounced long. And in some examples, we have the word no. And in open, we have two syllables. The first syllable is O, and an open syllable. Closed syllables have a single vowel, same thing, but now they're followed by a consonant or consonants. So the vowel is short. There's always a but though, right? We have schwa, right? Schwa happens, unfortunately. And schwa happens when we have open, unaccented syllables that are not the main focus of our inflection, okay? So when we have the word consonant, right? Con is a closed syllable spelled exactly like it sounds, but s is unaccented and in an open syllable. So it would be schwa, right? So schwa is very difficult to spell. So students need to have seen the word multiple times to know that the vowel spelling is E or A or O, right? Depending on what it is. Okay, so I'm hoping that you know a little bit about open and close in that 5-second tutorial. So here's an example of an open and close, go versus got. Okay. Jot down an example that you can think of. So here's your application. So that might be co or con, right? Lots of opportunities. So what we're going to do, and this is right from that article that I shared with you at the beginning, is, hey, let's just do some practice. Have a little chart on the side of your board and just do a quick review, a warm up, with your students. It's okay. Feels a little silly when you're 14, but hey, if you don't know short vowels, then you can't read multisyllabic words because 40% of all syllables are made up of short vowels. So we need to know short vowels, and we can't assume that kids do know them. So distributed practice is important here, right? We want to introduce it, we want to practice it, and then move through there, right? So hi and hit and me and met. Good, great. Those are great examples. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to practice the short sounds. Ready? So I'm going to point to the sound. You say it. I'm going to give a 1/2 second delay so that you can check. Okay, so we can't do it together, and I can't give you corrective feedback in this form yet, but this is what I would do, right? I would say sound, eh, sound, ah, sound, sound, eh, sound, ah. So you knew exactly what we were looking for, not a letter name. You're looking for a sound. Those are the short vowel sounds. Mix them up, right? Just practice those. Make sure that students are able to identify those very quickly, right? Now, let's say the 3 sounds of the vowel. So you would have done these in a sequence, right? And so students would know what the sequence is, right? And so the first sound is I, the second sound is E, and the third sound is I. Okay, so they have been taught that, we're practicing those, and those are your vowels, right? And now we're going to practice those in a chart format, right? And so we're going to have students, once we've done open and closed, practice what those syllables are pronounced like, right? Just practicing isolated syllables so that we get really good at this, building that practice gap, right? So this is open syllable. Then I would say part or read, low, read, T, read, add, read, up, right? You can put in some doubling rules in there, any of those rules that you've seen, right? Hopefully they'll recognize un as a prefix and not just as a syllable, right? And so we want to practice those things so that we can do work like taking apart big words. And so let's dive into that ESHALOV strategy. ESHALOV stands for every syllable has at least one vowel. So here is a checklist that's right in the article. So we can break apart this word, right? And making sure that it looks like it's spelled okay and that it has a single vowel in each part. So when we're looking through this word, we notice that there's an E here and an I here. Nope, that does not fit that every syllable has at least one vowel strategy. Is the spelling okay? No, you cannot have T hanging around by itself. All right, look at the second one. This is also a no because we have E and I still together in the same part, and we cannot have CT, 2 consonants together. What about the next one? Yes, it fits the ESHALOV strategy, but you can't have the letter R hanging around by itself at the end. What about the next one? Yes, ESHALOV. Is the spelling okay? Yeah, that could work. So now we can sound this out, right? So this would be a closed syllable, rest. This is our ICT. restrict, restrict. Okay, you can kind of get there. Can you do the next one? Can we do it this way? R-E-S-T-R-I-C-T? Sure, that fits both. And can we do R-E? Sure, open syllable. And then the second part is strict, which you all can recognize, right? And so yes, we could do that. So we would say that as restrict. Oh, that's a little closer, right? That's a little bit closer to what I know, restrict. And you cannot do the last one, right? That does not fit those strategies. So this is a really easy way that you can say, identify the vowels. We've practiced those vowels, making sure they're in separate parts. You have to teach things like silent E, right? Consonant L-E, those little things there too. But almost always syllables have a vowel letter. And so we can divide. So this is in your handout. If you wanted to use your handout, the word lexicon is there. You just jot it on your scratch paper though. And here's what you can do, right? We're going to divide lexicon, which I shouldn't have said that to you. That's one of the rules, right? Make sure that you don't pronounce the word if you're having kids spend time decoding it, right, with these strategies, because then you've just given them the answers. So pick a word they don't know, model it, model it, model it, model it, practice it with guided feedback, right? And so here are the two ways. There are 3 vowels that fit ESHALOV and spelling okay. L-E-X-I-C-O-N. And that's a Pete Bauer strategy where you spell it together, those parts together. L-E-X-I-C-O-N. So pronounce these with me. Lex, this would be open syllable, lexicon, or make that schwa, and it would be lexicon, right? Or lexicon. We don't usually put the X at the beginning of words, but it does sometimes happen. So which one's closer? Well, in both instances, we do have to flex. We have to flex the vowel, that to get to lexicon, okay? And so we're going to teach kids that we're going to flexibly say that. And what we're hoping to do is connect it with a word that is known, right? Because if they don't have the word in their lexicon, then they're not going to be able to check it against something that they know. So if they've never heard the word lexicon, they won't know if it's lexicon or lexicon, right? So those are the things that we need to build vocabulary as well as these strategies for decoding big words. So then we're going to practice for automaticity. So I'm not going to do that just for time's sake, but we would practice long. Those macrons are long sounds. So the oo sound and the sound for the o spelling, right? And if kids have trouble with that, you can remember some mnemonics like put your foot in the boot. Something that's semantically connected that helps them remember the 2 sounds of o is really effective. And so we would practice those just like we did our open and closed syllables, right? So we practice some combinations. Again, this might show up a little bit more frequently in intervention, but these are some things that you can do. Break apart the words that you're going to see that day in your vocabulary into their parts. And so that ESHALOV strategy works best for students that don't have very much morphemic knowledge. They're just starting out with some basic skills, okay? So the steps are mark all the vowels, right? There's all the vowels. Wow, lots of vowels here, right? And then we join any vowel teams together. So what would we join together? O-I, they're right close together, right? And we identify those known parts. Oh, hey, I know un, right? That has a U. It's also a prefix, but I have the U and N together. I have the second part, which is the A, and then I have our vowel team together, and separately I have A-B-L-E, right? Which is a part. So then we count those parts. How many parts do we have? Can either be together, depending on if they recognize that, but the ESHALOV strategy should have it apart, like the second one. Apologies there. So we would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parts, right? And then we pronounce the parts. Un, void, bull, right? Does it look okay? Now we're going to squish it together. We're going to say the word un, and if they say a, because it's open syllable, unavoidable, they can flex it, right? And check the word. So it is unavoidable. So that is the strategy. And you do have the full page handout for that, so you can practice that. But here it is up in the corner. just to remind us. So you have the word exposures in your text, okay? So the word, or your handout, apologies. So you have the word exposures, I believe. So exposures would look something like this, right? We're going to mark all the vowels. You can do it with me. Join any vowel teams. So we're going to join up U and E, right? Because that is a vowel, silent E component. And then we are going to identify those parts. Maybe you know that the word parts is EX, but the syllables are EX, POS, UR, E, right? And S is hooked on because it is a suffix, okay? So if you've taught those suffixes, we are leaning toward peel-off strategy here. But if you don't know those suffixes, then you're just looking for those vowel parts. We're counting up the word parts that you expect, right? And then you're breaking those parts up, saying those parts together, exposures, right? And how do you know that that's an O there? Well, here's your affixing rule, that you have a silent E and you're adding on that silent E, drop the E, add the vowel suffix. Okay, so that's kind of where we would want kids to be exposed, right, to those underlying structural features of a word like exposures. Okay, so just make that really visible for them. So the key here is flexibility for independence. In letters, you're going to learn all 6 syllable types, so much more about schwa, right? But we really have to teach kids to have a set for variability, that flexibility to tune in the word to sounding like something that they know or sounding natural, right? With that inflection. And so we want to practice that E, A, I, O, U, Y. They all can make that schwa pronunciation because it's a reduced vowel. But we want to practice those vowels, right? So the overt strategy is really simple. You give students an index card and you cover up, right? Going left to right, the vowels and the parts, and then you try it, right? So we're trying it. We're covering up the rest. Here's the first vowel. We're going to divide after the first vowel. That happens most of the time where the vowel is long. So we would say this part, re. We would remove the card. We put our vowel teams together, or silent E, like vowel teams, right? Or vowel digraphs, whatever their program's calling that, saying the U, reduce, and then we'll put it together, reduce. Is that a word that I know? Oh yeah, it is. Okay, great. So we could try it the other way. And this overt strategy turns into a covert strategy where they can just use their finger. Okay. So spelling pronunciation must be connected to the student's lexicon, right? So we want to be sure that we are working on words, right? And being sure that we look at meaning as well. So the morphological analysis is part 4. Just waiting for my slide to catch up. There we go. So morphological analysis really unlocks the meaning of words and relatives, right? So a morpheme is a part, it's a small meaningful unit of language. And the base of a word is a free morpheme that can stand alone, right? Or a bound morpheme that has to be combined, like struct, right? So the word go is a free morpheme, struct is a bound morpheme. And then we have language that we can stick affixes on, right? That change the meaning. And that's the power. We really want students to get there, where we're looking at morphemes and looking through the words to see if they know any meaningful parts. So the essential understanding in morphology instruction, moving to that second category, right, of strategies, is that we have to teach our students that words are spelled by sound, right? Not just letter sound correspondence, but also meaning, right? And that suffixes change the meaning. And if you're in second grade or above, teaching derivational suffixes, the part of speech. So it connects to syntax and word usage in sentences. So here's the instructional technique for morphemes. We want that scope and sequence that Pam was talking about. We also want to teach those explicitly, like she was talking about, for spelling and for meaning. And then we're going to apply those in practice in building words, reading words in target lists, sentences, and text. And that's what all of these researchers have done for you, is they've done this work of what do we know works for an instructional routine, and they put it into some practices and interventions, some that are free, some that are paid, right? So be looking at that. You don't have to do this all on your own. D is dictation, spelling practice. Make sure that you have practice in applying those affixing rules, right? And spelling those syllables, and then making some corrections, okay? So we want to teach those most common affixes, and there's lists of those. I have some hidden slides in my slide of the most common prefixes and suffixes. Really important if you're teaching students with dyslexia. Spend time on what's high utility, right? Explicit affix introduction looks like this. We're going to say it. This prefix is miss. What prefix? Miss. We're going to provide a sample word. This word is misheard. What word? Misheard, right? I'm going to write it on the board so they can see the word, and then we're going to define it, right? The word misheard means I heard the word incorrectly, right? So miss means wrongly or badly. What does miss mean? Wrongly or badly. Let's think of some words, right? Or we can read words or create words with an affix bank that have the words with miss, right? So now we're adding the affix miss to our bank. We've built words with miss, right? Mistake, right? Misheard, and all of those words that are related to wrong or badly, right? And now we're going to write it and review it. Okay, so that is the affix introduction. So on the side, right, you're practicing your vowels, you're practicing syllables, and then you're also teaching those affixes. And come together with your science people and your ELA people to come up with a collection of all the things that you've taught, right? Because we want to know all those morphemes that everyone as a team is teaching to our students, right, as they go from class to class. So the peel-off strategy is the strategy that is really looking at those morphemes. So essentially the peel off is circle the prefixes, right? That would be com if they know the prefix com, right? That is a chameleon prefix. Circle the suffixes. Those are suffix s, right? ion, which makes a noun. And then we mark those vowels, right? But we're only going to mark the vowels. And this is slightly different than some programs or some routines. We're only going to pay attention, right, to what's left, because we've already recognized com, shun, and the suffix s. So all we have left are bin-a, right, and t. The ti works together for sh, right? So we're going to mark those vowels, I, a, or what left. So we have two syllables because we have two vowels. Now we're going to say the word parts. Say them with me. Com, closed syllable, bin, open syllable, a, shun. Okay, so we put that here. We could have put at there, but really with ion, it's probably ate. So we would say 8, right? So com, bin, a, shuns, combinations. Oh yeah, that's pretty close. Okay, so we're going to say the word, and then if you need to flex the vowel, you did, right? Combinations. So that is the general peel-off strategy. This is my go-to strategy when I'm working with students. What parts do you know? Take those off, right? What do we have left? Use your fingers if you need to, and just focus on those few letters that are inside and do your decoding with just those few. Most of the time, it's only 2 syllables left, right? In a 4 or 5 or longer word. So we have lots of ways that we can practice those strategies, and really teaching that combination, right, of those strategies. So these were some words to practice, right? Depression, symbolize, and those are there for you to look at. So we're taking off those syllables, what's left, noticing those spelling patterns like sh, right? And the final piece here is that instructional plan. So your morphological strategies. So looking at explicit instruction, teaching those affixes, and building that fluency with targeted word reading lists, introducing them to strategies that they can use eventually independently, but with lots of modeling and practice. Spelling out is a video that is in the PowerPoint if you'd like to access that. And there's application, right? We can play some games. Word Connections has lots of different games that are already pre-created for you. And then having that morpheme wall will help you look through those. So I'm not going to go through that encoding strategies, but I'm just going to spend just a couple minutes. Unfortunately, I wish we would have a little bit more time, but you can definitely look through the slides for this. But I want you to come back around to thinking about the Great Depression and planning with the end in mind. So when we're thinking about an enduring understanding in a unit, right, we want to think about our content objectives, what we want students to know from our ELA standards, but also what do we want them to understand about literacy and language? And so what are your literacy and language objectives? So the big ideas, those enduring understandings, is that this is, right, we have themes of coming of age, right? We have the era of the Great Depression. That's that knowledge bank, world knowledge that students need to know, that shapes who we are and what we know. And as a culminating task, right, we have a writing task, which is normally what we do in secondary. So we want students to write about the phrase out of the dust and how it relates to the theme. That's definitely a higher order task, and students have to be reading grade level text to be able to do that. So we want to think about giving kids an on-ramp and access. And we've talked about rare words and vocabulary. I'm just going to go to this slide and show you that when we're thinking about AI, right, as a really powerful tool, what we have to be very careful about is always giving kids that have word level difficulty a lower level passage, right? Hopefully you can tell just kind of by skimming and scanning that the paragraph on the left is a high lexile, it's higher level readability, versus the one on the right, right? Dorothea Lange took a famous photograph called Migrant Mother. She took a picture rather than photograph. And it shows a woman from Oklahoma, right? So let's take a look at those big words. The big words are everywhere, all through both of those, because they are written at a 650 and a 1050 lexile. But let's compare them a little bit more closely. We have the word showed, but in the high lexile, we have words like depict and portrayal. They're rare vocabulary words that are also multisyllabic. We have substituted referred to for called, a basic word, and very poor for poverty. So when you plug in a text and make it a lower level readability, not only does the decoding level go down, but also the richness, right? The semantic density of the vocabulary changes, right? When we're looking at text complexity as well, the syntactic complexity reduces. So we could give students the 650 lexile, and then we can hand them the next lexile, the ReadWorks article, which is actually right in between here, and then even boost them up, maybe partner them up with a strong reader, a little bit stronger reader, to have that partner who models fluent reading, right? So we're thinking about big words, rare words, abstract nouns that gets us through that vocabulary threshold, which is the point where students can then really learn from the text. And if you're going to learn from text, you have to know 95% of the words. So we have to get through that big word barrier, not only to decode the words, but also to own the words, to know what the words mean. So one last idea here is that we can bootstrap kids into that complex text using something called a text set. So some of you are using knowledge building curricula that have a collection of sets with a core text, and then supplementing text. This is a framework that is called the quad set text sets. So our target text is out of the dust, but maybe you start with what we did this morning, and you start with, you start with visual text to build knowledge, right? You're talking, you're discussing, you're building schema, you're activating, and then you build in an accessible text, right? To build up that motivation. You have to know something to learn something. And so let's build their stores of knowledge if they don't have any idea about out of the dust, right? Out of the Dust Bowl Depression era. So let's build that with some emotion, some real strategies, right? Or some real content there. And then we get into that ReadWorks article. So all through these discussions and these texts, you've seen the word depression, migrant, drought, poverty, resilience over and over and over again, so that they are more able to read those texts fluently and right on that grade level that you're expecting them. Zooming out, right, this would be building knowledge over time, right? In 5th grade, we read Out of the Dust. And in 12th grade, look at what has opened up for us, The Grapes of Wrath, right? Reading Steinbeck about the same idea, different purpose, different type of text, right? But for 12th graders, written at a whopping 1,300 Lexile level. So if in 5th grade, they've studied about this Dust Bowl era and the Depression, right, they're more readily able to access. So what we want to do is build those vocabulary pieces, knowledge, and our fluent word reading skills to be able to get to that content knowledge. We want students to be able to walk in, right, to MoMA and visit the exhibit of Dorothea Lange's Migrant Mother and be able to read what is on the placard. Migrant Mother is considered to be a classic canon of American art, and we want our students with dyslexia and all our students to be able to access our stores of knowledge collectively. So I built this bridge for us to kind of just think about, reiterate what it takes to plan for students to on-ramp into that academic text and the task. Sorry, it's tired, my slides. In order to be able to do that high-level task, read aloud 2 levels ahead, right? Teach that vocabulary, spend time on word analysis, introduce a collection of texts, right, that range from simple to stretch text, but don't always relegate students that have word reading difficulties to a low-level text. And that text set is planful and it helps us get there. So let's read this together as we wrap up. We must organize our reading in every subject, so each text bootstraps the language and knowledge needed for the next. Gradually, students will be ready for texts of greater complexity. That's Marilyn Adams from 2010. Fantastic article that everyone should read, the AFT, Advancing Our Students' Language and Literacy. Okay, so Kate, that was lofty, but if there are any questions or if we have time to take questions, we can do that.
I love it. Thank you so much. I hope all of you in the intermediate and secondary grades have ideas of what you want to go back with to your classroom. We do have a few questions, and I will try and get through a few before we break for lunch. So one of the questions was more specific to 4th grade intervention students, and what should they look for if they're determining to use a syllable-based versus a morpheme-based type intervention?
Well, I think it's all about instruction. So what have students been taught? Devin Kearns would definitely land on the side of whenever you can harness morphemes, you want to go with that strategy because it gives us an in window, right, into word meaning and the morphological relatives of those words. And so I would always revert to morphology over just syllable types and syllable division. So paying attention to that sound, structure, and meaning structure of the word.
Love it. Thank you. And then as we get a little bit more into teaching adolescents, one of the questions became, for those students in secondary that are missing their foundational decoding skills, would you primarily focus on teaching them how to decode polysyllabic words, or would you scale back to basic decoding skills, or when would you know what to do which?
So always diagnostic assessment, and your really good intervention research-based programs will have an embedded assessment for that to tell you sort of an entry point of where to put students there. But I'm going to tell you that most older students are still going to need those basic skills, but in an age-appropriate way. So we want to be working on multisyllabic words while we're still working on short vowels, right? We're not reading the decodable text that 1st graders are reading. So Third Quest has done a really great job of doing that with some motivation pieces and age-appropriate texts that they feel like readers. So if you are getting into a middle school and you cannot read basic words at 1st grade, 2nd grade level, there's a lot of emotional and other things going on. And so really that self-efficacy piece is huge for those older readers. I'll just throw out Dr. Julie Brown from Vermont. She works at Woodstock, and she's done some presentations for Patton, and the Reading League Pennsylvania really has a school-based vision of what secondary instruction and literacy looks like for students that are struggling and across all those domains. So look her up. It's easy to spell, Julie Brown, and Woodstock. So she's done a fabulous job with her team of really embracing what it takes to get all students to be able to read secondary.
Yes. I just heard her last week at Plain Talk. She was fabulous.
Yes, definitely.
So, okay, so a quick question, and then I want to sort of summarize what I believe I heard you say when we talk about using strategies to really support across secondary content areas. So one clarifying question, you had provided us some notes. Would you consider your notes skeletal notes?
Yes.
Okay, and so would you consider that the same as guided notes?
So skeletal notes usually have some fill in the blanks, questions, but they're pretty much the same. And maybe someone can call me out and say the differences.
Okay.
But pretty much, yeah, I would say that about
So
the same.
some of the things I heard you say today were skeletal notes would be super helpful in helping to just build focus on comprehension, on saying the words. Maybe you're throwing in how you might use your ESHALOV's decoding on that sheet. But I also heard you say hearing, seeing, and saying throughout every content area class, how important that would be to strengthen neural connections and distributive practice. So is there anything else, if you had like one or two things you're like, do this across the content areas to support students, would you change those? Would you add to it for our adolescent readers and for our secondary teachers?
Yes. So the thing that we always start with is if you're introducing vocabulary, break down the vocabulary words. You can look up Anita Archer's secondary videos, and she does a really great job. If there's something weird, like the word symbolize, she just says, say it, right? For the Y in symbol. And you just break it down by syllables, model it with them, make sure that kids are saying the words. And what I see most of the time is even if we can convince science and social studies teachers to pronounce the vocabulary words, which is, I don't know, it's just something that they're not used to. Say the word, repeat the word, use that SOS, have kids use it in their language, because you have to produce it to put it into long-term memory. So it's not good enough for you to just hear the vocabulary words, I'm going to read them. You need to say it, the kids need to repeat it, you need to break it down, look for meaningful parts. It's fast. So just put it into your vocabulary introduction. I think that's the easiest way to start. And then maybe you can practice some short vowels later.
Erin, thank you so much for joining us. I could keep asking you questions and picking your brain. I know that we have to break for lunch here soon.
Yeah.
We appreciate your resources, your knowledge, and taking some strategies that can be generalizable into the content without necessarily having one particular program. So thank you so much for just sharing the general strategies that can be layered onto content. We appreciate your time so much.
Thank you so much for having me.